That night, Madeline woke up with a dry throat. As she made her way downstairs, she noticed a faint light leaking through the gap of the atelier. A room that should have been empty. But there, standing inside, was her mother-in-law, Beatrice. Beatrice held a flashlight in one hand, and in the other, she gripped a box cutter. She approached the painting quietly, murmuring something in a trembling voice. "Forgive me, but this is the only way." At that moment, Madeline understood. This wasn't mere jealousy. A past sin was about to be painted over, right there and then. Madeline Carter gazed at the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window as she carefully cleaned her paintbrush. At 45, she was finally trying to reclaim time for herself. It was a challenge for her to enter an art contest, for the first time in 20 years. It was 3 months ago that she had made the decision to chase her dreams again, dreams she had sealed away since marriage. The blue watercolor paint flowed from the brush, faintly tinting the clear water. As she was captivated by its beauty, a voice called from behind her. "What a lovely color." She turned to find her mother-in-law, Beatrice Carter, standing there. At 68, Beatrice wore her perfectly arranged gray hair and a smile that was elegant yet carried a hint of coldness. Dressed in a black cardigan, she exuded an intellectual atmosphere like that of a museum curator. "Thank you, Mother," Madeline replied, and Beatrice's gaze slowly moved from the painting to the art supplies scattered around the sink. The navy blue tube, red paintbrush, palette knife. Madeline sensed a subtle change in her mother-in-law's expression as she observed these items. "But perhaps you should be a bit more organized? David comes home tired, and having the kitchen this cluttered." There seemed to be some other emotion hidden beneath the surface kindness of those words. Madeline hurriedly began gathering her art supplies. "I'm sorry. I'll clean up right away." No, having hobbies is wonderful. But don't forget about your family." Beatrice said this while placing her hand lightly on Madeline's shoulder. That hand was colder than expected. That evening, when Madeline went to retrieve her art supplies as usual, neither the paintbrushes nor the palette were anywhere to be found. After searching around, she discovered them neatly organized in a corner of the living room bookshelf. Her paintbrushes were arranged by color, canvases stacked by size. It was perfectly arranged like a display in an art supply store. "Mother organized them for you," said her husband David, who was reading the newspaper on the sofa without looking up. The 47-year-old middle school teacher was loved by his students as a kind teacher, but he became strangely quiet in front of his mother. In their 20 years of marriage, Madeline had grown accustomed to this. "Oh, how thoughtful," Madeline smiled, but a small sense of unease sprouted in her heart. Why was there a need for Beatrice to move them from where Madeline always used them? The next morning, Madeline was shopping at the neighborhood supermarket. While selecting carrots in the produce section, she was approached by her neighbor Dorothy Harris. "Madeline, I heard you're painting." Dorothy, a woman in her 50s who usually spoke cheerfully, had an unusually low tone that day. She looked around before lowering her voice even further. "Well, good luck." "But..." She cut off her words there, displaying an expression that seemed both sympathetic and troubled. "Be careful," she said before hurrying away. Madeline stood there holding her shopping basket. What did she mean by "be careful"? Even while paying at the register, she felt like the cashier was glancing at her repeatedly, with eyes that seemed to know some secret. On the way home, Madeline was lost in thought. Lately, it seemed like her neighbors' reactions had subtly changed. Even Linda Wilson from across the street, who used to exchange normal greetings, suddenly stopped conversations when their eyes met. When she arrived home, Beatrice was watching television in the living room. It was an art program. The screen showed works by famous painters. "Oh, welcome back." Beatrice turned and smiled, but her eyes remained fixed on the screen. The announcer's voice flowed from the television. This work is known for its beautiful composition, but there have actually been problems with imitation works in the past. At that moment, Beatrice's hand gripped the remote tightly and changed the channel. What a boring program. Madeline gazed at her mother-in-law's profile. She had a slightly tense expression. She felt she had glimpsed a small crack in the emotions that were usually perfectly controlled. While preparing dinner, Madeline reflected on the day's events. Dorothy's warning, her neighbor's strange reactions, and Beatrice's subtle changes. Everything seemed somehow related to her starting to paint again. However, she still couldn't understand why. The sunset visible through the kitchen window was dyed orange. While thinking she wanted to paint that beauty, Madeline sighed deeply. Why did pursuing her small dream cause such complex emotions in those around her? She would learn the answer to that question later. About 2 weeks after applying for the contest, Madeline was spending her quiet time alone in the old magazine corner of the library. She had intended to research painting techniques, but a regional art magazine from the 1990s that she picked up by chance would completely change her life. Regional artists, discovering new talent. As she flipped through that featured article, a familiar name jumped out at her. Helen Smith. A promising new painter. In 1995, however, plagiarism allegations arose regarding multiple works. She was effectively banished from the art world. Madeline's hands trembled. The black and white photograph accompanying the article showed a young woman of about 25. She had well-formed features, intelligent gaze, and certainly familiar contours. It was unmistakably the young Beatrice Carter. At the time, Ms. Smith was the rising star of the local art world, but similarities to other painters' works were pointed out multiple times, and she ultimately chose the path of art education. Madeline read the article over and over. She had known that Beatrice's maiden name was Smith, but she had never imagined Beatrice had such a past in the art world. And why had she never heard this story before? On the way home from the library, various memories resurfaced in Madeline's mind. Beatrice's occasional display of deep knowledge about painting. Her complex expressions when watching art programs. And the subtle changes in attitude since she had started painting. That night, while cleaning up after dinner, Madeline pondered how to bring up this topic. However, Beatrice took an unexpected action first. After 10 p.m., while Madeline was reading in the bedroom, she heard Beatrice's voice on the phone downstairs. Normally she wouldn't pay attention, but the tone of her voice was clearly different from usual. There was tension and what sounded like fear of something. Madeline put down her book and quietly opened the bedroom door. From the top of the stairs, fragments of conversation in the living room could be heard. It was over 20 years ago, no one should remember. But if someone notices, tomorrow, everything will be over, then there'll be no need to worry anymore. Madeline held her breath as she listened. What did she mean by, tomorrow everything will be over? And what was the thing she got worried about from 20 years ago? When the phone call ended, she could hear Beatrice's footsteps heading toward the stairs. Madeline hurriedly returned to the bedroom and pretended to continue reading. However, her heart was pounding violently. The next morning's breakfast was quieter than usual. David was eating while reading the newspaper in his pre-work rush. Beatrice was carefully spreading jam on her toast while glancing at Madeline several times. Madeline, Beatrice suddenly spoke. Do you really need this contest? You have housework, and David needs your support too, doesn't he? There was an unprecedented strong pressure in those words. As if she were desperately trying to prevent something. Mother, David intervened for the first time. Since Madeline is working hard at this, we should support her. Beatrice showed a surprised expression at her son's words. And in her eyes dwelt an emotion Madeline had never seen before. Fear. It was clearly fear. Afterward, Madeline sat in her atelier holding her paintbrush, lost in thought. The painting of the old church illuminated by sunset was nearly complete. However, she couldn't get the article she had seen at the library the previous day out of her mind. Around 2 p.m., the delivery doorbell rang. When Madeline went to the entrance, there stood a different delivery man than usual. He was a man in his 50s with a friendly smile. "Mrs. Carter? Here's your package." While receiving the package, the delivery man casually said, "Ma'am, I heard you're entering a painting competition. All the best." Madeline was surprised. How did the delivery man know about her hobby? "Oh, yes, thank you." But the man suddenly became serious. "Please be careful. In the past, there have been various incidents." With that, the man left. Madeline stood at the entrance, continuing to ponder what he meant. That evening, when David came home, he seemed more tired than usual. "How was your day?" When Madeline asked, David showed a troubled expression. "At school, one of my colleagues asked me something strange." "Something strange?" "About Mother, whether she had some trouble in art-related matters in the past." Madeline's heart nearly stopped. "What did you tell them?" "I said I didn't know." "But, does Mother have a past I don't know about?" That night, Madeline couldn't sleep. Beatrice's past, the neighbor's strange reactions, and the delivery man's warning. Everything seemed to be connecting along a single line. And the following day was finally the day before the contest. Beatrice's words on the phone, "Everything will be over tomorrow," weighed heavily on her heart as an ominous premonition. Madeline stared at the ceiling, feeling a vague anxiety about what might happen. Whatever the truth was, she felt she had reached a point of no return. On the morning before the contest, Madeline was gazing at her completed painting. The old church illuminated by sunset. Warm orange light enveloped the stone walls, containing sacred beauty within the silence. It was a work she had poured her heart into. Looking at the painting that represented a month of effort, Madeline felt both anticipation and tension for tomorrow. "Excellent work," came a voice from behind. She turned to find Beatrice standing there. However, contrary to the praise, complex emotions could be seen swirling in her mother-in-law's expression. As if she were seeing something beautiful while simultaneously feeling pain. "Thank you," Madeline replied, and Beatrice moved even closer to the painting. Her eyes were observing the work's details with unusual thoroughness. The composition, color usage, brush strokes. As if she were confirming something. "This composition. I feel like I've seen it somewhere before." Beatrice's voice trembled slightly. "Church paintings are a common motif," Madeline answered naturally, but she felt unsettled by her mother-in-law's agitation. In the morning, Madeline was doing a final check of her painting. The framing was perfectly finished in preparation for tomorrow's delivery. However, she was bothered by Beatrice frequently passing by the atelier. Even without any business there, there was a sense that she was peering in repeatedly. As if she were monitoring something. During lunch, Beatrice wouldn't touch her food. Madeline didn't miss the slight trembling of the hand holding the soup spoon. "Mother, are you feeling unwell?" "No. I just have something on my mind." That answer was unnatural. The usual Beatrice would never show such weakness. Around 2 p.m., while Madeline was packing her painting in the atelier, Beatrice suddenly appeared. "Madeline, I need to talk to you." There was an unprecedented urgency in that voice. "Actually, I think you should give up on the contest." Madeline stopped her hands that were holding the packing materials. "Why?" "It's too early for you. The art world is a very harsh place." Beatrice's eyes held an emotion resembling fear. "But Mother, you're the one who knows so much about art. You used to paint, didn't you?" In that moment, Beatrice's expression froze. Who told you such a thing? I found an old magazine at the library by chance. An article about Helen Smith. Beatrice's face was drained of color. That was a long time ago. But you were a wonderful painter. I was moved reading the article. Madeline's words were gentle, but to Beatrice they sounded like accusations. Madeline, please, don't talk about that anymore. Beatrice's voice was trembling. During dinner, the family conversation was sporadic. Beatrice didn't touch her food, merely moving it around on her plate with her fork. David also noticed his mother's abnormal state and looked at her with concern. Mother, are you really okay? You look pale. Yes, I'm fine. Just a little tired. However, that answer was clearly forced. That night, Madeline couldn't sleep from excitement and tension. A contest after 20 years. The next day might be the beginning of her new life. Even past midnight, she was still wide awake. Around 2 a.m., feeling thirsty, she left the bedroom to get water from the kitchen. As she quietly descended the stairs, she heard small sounds coming from the atelier. Though the lights shouldn't have been on, a faint glow was leaking out. Madeline approached the atelier while holding her breath. Peering through the gap in the door, an unbelievable scene met her eyes. Beatrice was standing there with a flashlight in one hand. And in the other hand, she gripped a box cutter. Madeline's heart began pounding violently. Beatrice stood in front of Madeline's painting with an expression as if she had made some resolution. Her face was a mixture of anguish and determination. Forgive me, but this is the only way, Beatrice murmured quietly. And then, in the next moment, Beatrice pointed the box cutter toward the painting. At first she hesitantly made small cuts. But gradually her movements became more certain. She carefully and systematically destroyed Madeline's work. Madeline watched while holding her breath. It was an unbelievable sight. Why was her mother-in-law destroying her painting? And in such secrecy, in the dead of night? Beatrice's movements were cautious, as if trying to make it look like natural destruction, leaving no evidence. Starting from the central part of the painting, gradually spreading to the whole. The beautiful sunset scene of the church was being ruthlessly slashed. At that moment, Madeline suddenly understood everything. The old article found in the library. Helen Smith's plagiarism allegations. The neighbors' strange reactions. Beatrice's agitation. And her abnormal interest in her own painting. Someone had noticed that the composition of the church she had painted resembled a work Beatrice had painted 20 years ago. And fearing this would become public, Beatrice was destroying the evidence. While witnessing her mother-in-law's crime, Madeline felt a strange calmness. Rather than anger, a deep understanding filled her heart. Beatrice's past pain, current fear, and desperate actions. Everything connected in a single line. When Beatrice finished her work, she turned off the flashlight and quietly left the atelier. Madeline stood in the darkness, gazing at her destroyed work. But strangely, Madeline's heart was peaceful. Because she intuitively understood that this moment would be the key to opening the door to truth. The following morning, this incident would be discovered. And that would be the time to reveal everything. As Madeline quietly returned to the bedroom, she began formulating a new plan for it. Not as a victim, but as one who would reveal the truth. Destruction is sometimes the beginning of regeneration. Madeline understood this deeply. The next morning, the incident was discovered. At 7 a.m., when Madeline headed to the atelier, a scene spread before her as if a typhoon had passed through. The frame lay on the floor, the painting ruthlessly slashed. A month's effort had been destroyed without a trace. Burglars. Call the police. Beatrice's scream echoed throughout the house. Her mother-in-law rushed over in her nightgown, showing an expression of shock as if seeing the devastation for the first time. The performance was nearly perfect. How terrible, how could this happen? David was in a panic, about to call the police immediately. However, Madeline was smiling quietly. It's all right, Mother. Both Beatrice and David turned around at her overly calm reaction. All right? Madeline, your artwork. Yes, but don't worry. Madeline began carefully cleaning up the torn painting. Her composure was as if she had anticipated this situation. At that moment, an old newspaper article fluttered down from beneath the torn canvas. Rising artist Helen Smith from 20 years ago, banished from art world for plagiarism allegations. The yellowed newspaper headline caught everyone's eyes. The photograph showed a young Beatrice. This is... David's voice trembled. It was the moment he first learned of his mother's past. I found it by chance last night. Madeline's voice was surprisingly calm. I finally understood why Mother was so upset when she saw my painting. Beatrice's face turned pale. Why are you bringing up such old stories? What are you trying to do? But that's not all. Madeline placed a small digital camera on the table. Actually, I'd been sensing something suspicious in the atelier lately, so I installed a hidden camera. Beatrice's face was completely drained of color. This is the footage from 2:17 a.m. last night. The screen clearly showed Beatrice destroying Madeline's painting with a flashlight and box cutter in hand. The entire deliberate and systematic crime was recorded. Mother, why? David's voice was filled with disappointment and confusion. I. Beatrice was at a loss for words. Just then, the front door chime rang. When Madeline went to answer, a man in his 60s was standing there. Mrs. Carter? I'm Robert Wilson. I used to be the president of the Regional Art Association. The man's expression was serious. Actually, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. When Mr. Wilson was shown into the living room and saw Beatrice, he sighed deeply. Helen. No, Beatrice. It's been 20 years now. Beatrice remained looking down, not answering. Actually, yesterday I received a call from someone in the neighborhood. They said that Madeline's painting resembled a certain work from the past. Mr. Wilson took out an old file. This is the Street Point Mary's Church at Sunset that Helen painted in 1995. David gasped when he saw the photograph that emerged from the file. The composition, color usage, everything was strikingly similar to Madeline's work. But this was not plagiarism. Everyone was surprised by Mr. Wilson's words. In fact, this work was the true masterpiece. At the time, another painter accused her of plagiarism, but investigation revealed that it was actually that painter who had copied Helen's composition. Beatrice looked up. However, before that truth could be revealed, Helen withdrew from the art world. She lost the opportunity to clear her name. How terrible! Madeline finally understood her mother-in-law's true pain. And now, seeing Madeline's painting, I'm convinced. This talent has definitely been inherited from Helen. Even without blood relation, her artistic sensibility must have somehow been passed down. Mr. Wilson stood up. I'll be serving as a judge at today's contest. I would very much like to see a new work. Madeline smiled. Actually, I have one prepared. She brought another canvas from the next room. It was the same church painting, but this time it was a more powerful work themed on regeneration from destruction. This is... Beatrice gasped. Anticipating last night's events, I'd been preparing this since last week. My true piece has been safely stored elsewhere all along. David looked at his wife. You knew everything. Yes. But I can also understand Mother's feelings. That's why I chose this method. Madeline turned to face Beatrice. Mother, you did nothing wrong. You were just too trapped by past pain. Tears welled up in Beatrice's eyes. I was jealous of your talent. And I was afraid that my past failures would resurface again. But it's all right now. Mr. Wilson spoke again. Beatrice, if you would allow it, I'd like to restore the honor you lost 20 years ago. And Madeline, I would very much like you to continue presenting your works. That afternoon, more people than usual gathered at the contest venue. Thanks to Mr. Wilson's efforts, local media had come to cover the event. Madeline's work, Regeneration from Destruction, deeply moved the judges. Beyond its technical perfection, the narrative and spirituality embedded in the work were highly praised. With the announcement of her victory, loud applause erupted from the venue. Beatrice approached Madeline with tears in her eyes. Please, forgive me. However, Madeline answered resolutely. Mother, you don't need my forgiveness. But please find a new path for yourself. You still have so many possibilities ahead of you. That night, a local newspaper reporter interviewed Madeline. What did you learn from this experience? Madeline answered quietly. Difficulties sometimes teach us our true strength. And that the truth will always come to light. David, holding his wife's hand, showed a resolute attitude toward his mother for the first time. Mother, we're going to make a fresh start. Will you walk this path with us? Beatrice slowly nodded. With determination to lay down the burden of the past and live in the light of truth. 2 weeks had passed since the contest victory. Madeline's house was flooded daily with requests for interviews and visits. However, the most important changes for the family appeared in small, everyday moments. At breakfast time, Beatrice sat at the table with a natural expression rather than her previous perfect smile. Madeline, what are you planning to paint today? That question no longer carried surveillance or criticism, but pure interest. Actually, there's a work I'd like to paint together with you, Mother. Beatrice showed a surprised expression at Madeline's suggestion. With me? But I haven't painted for such a long time. It's all right. Talent has no expiration date. That afternoon, they sat side by side in the atelier. Beatrice's hands trembled at first, but gradually steadied as she held the brush. Techniques sealed away for 20 years began to gradually resurface. Your brushwork is truly beautiful, Mother. At Madeline's words, tears welled up in Beatrice's eyes. It's been years since someone spoke so kindly to me about painting. They were painting a series that captured the same landscape from different perspectives. Madeline painted from a present viewpoint, while Beatrice painted the same place from memory. The passage of time and differences in experience created rich contrasts in their works. A month later, Beatrice received a letter. The sender was Professor Linda Harrison from the State Art University. Dear Mrs. Beatrice Carter, I have seen the news of your return. I would very much like to meet with you and ask you to be an instructor in our adult art program. Beatrice read the letter over and over. Madeline, this isn't a dream, is it? It's reality, Mother. This is the beginning of your new life. When Beatrice accepted the university teaching position, the response exceeded expectations. Her first lecture themed The Courage to Begin Life's Second Chapter attracted applicants far exceeding capacity. I spent 20 years bound by past failures, Beatrice spoke frankly about her experience from the podium. However, truth will always come to light. And no matter how late, it's possible to make a fresh start. Many of the students included women of Beatrice's generation. They had all come to this classroom seeking turning points in their lives. Meanwhile, Madeline had opened a community art class. Every Saturday afternoon, neighborhood housewives gathered to paint. The classroom was named Atelier of Hope. It's never too late to start painting, Madeline said. Her classroom emphasized self-expression over technique. Many participants were women who had nearly lost themselves while being consumed by housework and childcare. One day, a woman appeared in the classroom. It was Elizabeth Johnson, the reporter who had covered the contest. "Actually, I wanted to try painting too," Elizabeth said shyly. "After covering your mother-daughter story, I wanted to start something new myself." Thus, women with various backgrounds began gathering at Madeline's classroom. Though different in age and occupation, they all shared the common wish to discover a new self. One Saturday afternoon, Beatrice stopped by the classroom. "Is there anything I can help with?" The sight of mother and daughter running the classroom together deeply moved the participants. "We're also struggling with family relationships," one participant murmured. "But seeing you two gives us hope." That evening, after finishing cleaning up the classroom, Madeline and Beatrice stood side by side watching the sunset. "Madeline, I can never thank you enough." "No, I've learned so much from you, Mother." Madeline turned around. "It was because we had difficulties that we were able to build our current relationship." 6 months later, a major article was published in the local newspaper. The headline read, "Family Bonds Connected Through Art, the Miracle Created by Atelier of Hope." The article detailed the transformations of women who attended Madeline and Beatrice's classes. Many cases were reported of people regaining confidence through painting and improving family relationships. "Atelier of Hope is not just a painting class," Madeline commented in the article. "It's a place where women discover their true selves." Beatrice was also interviewed. "Past failures become nourishment for the future. I want to continue conveying this to my students." That night, the 3 family members shared a leisurely dinner together for the first time in a while. "Next month, our joint exhibition will be held at the State Art Museum," Beatrice said happily. "The theme is artistic heritage across generations," Madeline replied. "We plan to display the same landscapes as seen from the perspectives of a mother and daughter." David felt deep satisfaction as he watched the 2 women. The family burden that had lasted for years was completely removed, and now his wife and mother were working as the best partners. "Watching you two teaches me what true strength really is." That night, Madeline wrote in her diary, "If you have the courage to face the truth, you can overcome any difficulty. And I learned that the deepest bonds are born through trials." Outside, quiet rain was falling, but inside the house was filled with warm light. The story that began with destruction had transformed into a story of creation and regeneration. Madeline and Beatrice had become true partners, supporting each other while walking their respective paths. A year had passed since then. On a spring afternoon, Madeline was working on a new piece in her home atelier. Colorful flowers were arranged by the window, and soft light enveloped the entire room. Her art supplies now lay in perfect reach, unmoved by anyone. "Madeline, it's tea time," Beatrice's voice called from downstairs. It was no longer a commanding tone, but a gentle call to a family member. In the living room, Beatrice was carefully preparing tea. On the table were cookies she had baked and a letter that had arrived that morning. "What's the letter about?" "From the State Art Museum. They want to hold an educational program using our works next spring." A peaceful smile graced Beatrice's face. Past pain no longer clouded her expression. At 4 p.m., students gathered at Atelier of Hope. Participation had tripled from the beginning, with a waiting list. Today again, women of various ages came to the classroom, each carrying their own stories. "Everyone, let's challenge ourselves with a special work today," Madeline said to her students. "Please express yourselves freely on the theme of new beginnings." Beatrice was gently instructing an elderly woman in the corner of the classroom. This woman had picked up a paintbrush for the first time after turning 60. "There are no mistakes. Please paint exactly as you feel." Beatrice's words carried deep persuasive power born from years of experience. In the evening, after cleaning up the classroom, Madeline and Beatrice saw off their students at the entrance. "Thanks to both of you teachers, I was able to start a new life," one student said gratefully as she left. "We'll be waiting for you again next week," Madeline waved in response. That night, when David returned from work, the house was enveloped in peaceful silence. The good aroma of dinner drifted from the kitchen, and in the living room, his wife and mother sat side by side preparing for the next day's class. "How was your day?" When David asked, Madeline turned and smiled. "It was a wonderful day." Beatrice also looked up. Every day is a continuous series of new discoveries. After dinner, Madeline headed to the atelier again. In the night's silence, she was conceiving a new work. This time, she planned to paint a landscape filled with hope for the future. Outside the window, moonlight gently illuminated the garden flowers. The story that began with a destroyed painting had now become an infinite cycle of creation and regeneration. Madeline picked up her brush and painted the first stroke on the canvas. It was also the beginning of a new story. Life after knowing the truth was indeed different. It was a life filled with hope that she had chosen for herself. In the quiet atelier, Madeline continued painting with a smile. Tomorrow, another new day would begin. And each of those days would become a brushstroke toward a more beautiful future.